The first half of the 6th chapter of Ketubot deals with the valuation of assets that are going into the marriage, and actually are listed on the Ketubot. But we're now going to get into, as we finish the chapter, just a set of questions about actually how many assets should go in the first place. So we're not talking about their valuation. We're just talking about, well, how much money does the bride get? And in particular, we're going to touch on questions that will only affect us if the father is no longer in a position to be able to dispose of assets for his daughter. So the assumption is going to be that the father will provide dowry for his daughter. But what if he's no longer around? So let's begin anyway in the 5th Mishnah. So someone who marries off his daughter but without any conditions. So this is kind of a basic minimum. Has to give her at least 50 zuz. Now remember, 50 zuz is the clothing allowance for a year. So that gives us an idea of the order of magnitude. And it's a quarter of the settlement in the ketubah on divorce. So in other words, the father gives at least 50 zuz as a dowry for his daughter. If he pledged to marry her, and the sense of the Mishnah is marry her without a daughter, but literally the Mishnah says marry her off naked. This means without a dowry. Well, it's interesting. Well, let's just explore this around. It means without a dowry, but the Mishnah will straight away get into questions of clothes. So interesting that the literal translation is aruma is naked. So he pledged, that is the husband pledged to marry her naked, i.e. without a dowry. The husband can't say, oh yeah, when you come into my house, I'll clothe her with my clothing, i.e. with clothing I'm going to provide. He must provide her with clothing while she's still in her father's house. In other words, when she's setting out from her father's house to the wedding, this must be a question of dignity. She needs to be already clothed, if you like, in a style to which her husband is going to clothe her when she's married. And now we're going to get into the question of what if the father's no longer around? Similarly, if they marry off an orphan, they must give her at least 50 zuz. 50 zuz is the minimum. So it's the norm, it's the kind of the standard allowance if the father doesn't say anything, but that is the minimum. That's the minimum. If there are funds in the purse, that means if funds are available, this must be from the charity budget. If funds are available, if funds are available, then they provide for her in accordance with her dignity. So this suggests, by the way, that a daughter of a good family will get more actually from the charity budget. Dignity is an important issue, and it kind of runs really right through the Masechet. Now, what if this orphan is married off by her mother and her brothers? And we learned that when an orphan is below the age of majority, she can be and the father's dead, she can be married off by her mother and her brothers. And the rabbis made a takana to allow this. But we still need to deal with the dowry. And of course, there's a conflict of interest here, because any money which is not handed over as dowry can be kept by the mother and the brothers. The brothers are going to inherit the residue of the estate after the sisters have been married off. So let's see what happens. So an orphan that's married off by her mother and her brothers. So the father's dead. And they write for her a dowry of, say, 150 zuz, which is, more than the minimum, but not an extraordinary amount. she may, when she reaches majority, claim what should have been given to her. And there's the Gemara learns, in general, she's entitled to 1/10 of the estate. So this could be a significant sum if her father's rich. So, and if they don't give that to her, she can come back and she can claim it. What if there are 2 daughters? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in Hisiu Habat Harishona, Rabbi Yehuda says, if they married off the first daughter, and by the way, most editions say if he married off the first daughter. So we have 2 slightly different situations here. If he married off the first daughter, that means the father when he was still alive. If they married off the first daughter, this is referring again to the mother and the brothers. Anyway, if he or they, the first daughter gets married anyway. The second must be given as much as the first. So in other words, the father's clearly no longer alive. We have some kind of precedent with the first daughter, whether it's her father married her off or the mother and the brothers married her off. The sages are going to articulate a principle that the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah is going to articulate a principle that she gets the same. And the sages will disagree. And the sages say, look, sometimes a person's poor and gets rich. Or Shirumani, maybe he's rich and he becomes poor. In other words, dowries do vary. They do vary from year to year, and we can't expect everyone to be treated equally. At least not everyone has the right to be treated equally. But they value the estate and then they give to her. So she's going to receive in proportion to the estate, but not necessarily in proportion to what her sister got. Now, what if the dead father gave instructions? Someone deposited money with an agent for his daughter. And she says, oh, I trust my husband. The trustee acts in accordance with his trust. Divrei Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir. In other words, a man deposits money with an agent for his daughter. The daughter can say, well, I'm happy for my husband to have this money, but the trustee is not allowed to hand over on behalf of, just on the word of the daughter. He has to fulfill his trust. And Rabbi Yossi is going to disagree. The Rambam will explain a little bit, but let's read Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, look, if it were a field and she wanted to sell it, in other words, if she had possession of it, it would be as if it was sold immediately. In other words, she can sell her possessions outright. Why do we prevent her instructing the agent? What are we talking about? Big Dola, the Mishnah answers, with an adult. An adult can dispose of their possessions. But in the case of a minor, the act of a minor has no legal validity. So her words to the agent don't have validity. So if you like, this part of the Mishnah seems to be shrinking the applicability of the first part. And Maimonides explains it. And he explains it nicely. It's worth looking at Maimonides just before we close. This is the close of the 6th chapter. The agent does what he's agented to do, what he's mandated to do, as commanded by the father. They don't listen to her, they don't give the husband anything. Clearly, the Maimonides is used to rapacious husbands who want to get their wives' money. And then he goes on to say, and this applies when she's betrothed. But after the marriage, she can dispose of her possessions as she likes, except if she's a minor. Except if she's a minor. If she's a minor, she doesn't have control. And then Maimonides explains that the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi only relates to an adult. who's betrothed, an adult who's between betrothal and marriage. In other words, everybody agrees that the full adult can do what she likes, and the minor absolutely cannot direct the agent. So we're talking about an adult who's betrothed but not married. The halacha Rabbi Meir, and the halacha goes according to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, who says the trustee must act in accordance with the condition of his trust. That is to say, between betrothal and marriage. After marriage, she has full control over her possessions, of providing that she's an adult.